Captain Kyle Morrison stood on the bridge of the Discovery and watched the alien ship grow larger on the view screen. His hands were steady, but his heart beat fast. This was it. First contact, the moment humanity had dreamed about for centuries. The year was 2187, and humans had finally figured out faster-than-light travel. They had ventured beyond their solar system expecting empty space. Instead, they found a galaxy full of life. Hundreds of alien species, vast empires, trade networks that spanned light years. And now, for the first time, humans were about to meet their neighbors. The alien ship was massive. It belonged to the Valthene Confederacy, one of the oldest powers in this region of space. Kyle had read every file Earth had managed to intercept about them. The Valthene were traders and warriors. They respected strength but despised weakness. They had crushed 3 emerging species in the last century alone. Kyle took a deep breath and smiled. It was a genuine smile, warm and friendly. He had practiced it in the mirror for hours, not because it was fake, but because he needed to get it exactly right. First impressions mattered. The communication channel opened. A Valthene commander appeared on screen. She was tall, covered in blue scales, with forearms and eyes that glowed amber. She looked at Kyle with obvious contempt. To her, humans were just another primitive species that had stumbled into space. The commander spoke in harsh tones. Her words, translated by the computer, were direct. Humans would submit to Valthene authority. They would pay tribute. They would accept inferior status in the galactic hierarchy. This was not negotiable. Kyle kept smiling. He nodded politely. He thanked the commander for her time and asked if they could discuss terms. The Valthene commander looked confused. Most new species either attacked or surrendered immediately. This human was doing neither. He was talking about negotiation like they were equals. 3 hours later, Kyle had secured a basic trade agreement. Humans would be allowed to establish colonies in unclaimed systems. They would pay reasonable tariffs. They would be recognized as an independent species. The Valthene commander left the negotiation table looking puzzled. She had given more concessions than she intended. There was something about this human's patience that had worn her down. That first contact set the pattern for everything that followed. Humans became known across the galaxy as the friendly ones, the patient ones, the species that never got angry, never sought revenge, never held grudges. When the Krathian Empire invaded a human mining colony and killed 37 people, the human response was to propose a peace conference. Ambassador Lauren Price became famous throughout 17 star systems. She was young, brilliant, and possessed an almost magical ability to make enemies become friends. The Krathians had a rigid culture built on honor and aggression. They had never lost a war. They saw compromise as cowardice. Lauren met with the Krathian War Council in their capital city. The walls were decorated with weapons from their conquered enemies. The council members sat in chairs made from the bones of creatures they had hunted. They expected the human ambassador to be intimidated. Instead, Lauren complimented their achievements. She asked about their history. She listened to their stories of conquest with genuine interest. When they insulted Earth's military, she laughed and agreed that humans were indeed new to space warfare. When they demanded humans abandon their mining operations, she proposed a joint venture instead. Profits would be shared. Both sides would benefit. The Krathian Council had never encountered anything like her. Their aggressive posturing bounced off her like water off stone. By the end of the week, they had signed a treaty that was far more favorable to humanity than anyone expected. The council members genuinely liked Lauren. They invited her back. They gave her honorary Krathian status. What the Krathians didn't know was that Lauren had spent 6 months studying their psychology before the meeting. She knew exactly which buttons to push. She knew when to be humble and when to be bold. Every word was calculated. Every smile was a strategic weapon. Back on Earth, in a secure facility beneath the streets of Geneva, Director Nathan Cole watched all these diplomatic victories with satisfaction. He was the head of the United Earth Intelligence Service. His job was to make sure humanity survived in a galaxy full of predators. Nathan's office walls were covered with screens showing data from across human space. Population numbers, military readiness, alien troop movements, economic indicators, resource distribution. He saw patterns that others missed. He planned for contingencies that others thought impossible. His assistant, a young analyst named Sophie Carter, brought him the latest intelligence reports. The Zenkar Trade Guild was expanding their operations near human colonies. The Tal Shar hegemony was building a new fleet. The Valthene Confederacy was experiencing internal political struggles. Nathan read each report carefully. He made notes. He updated his strategic models. Every piece of information was valuable. Every alien species had weaknesses. Every empire had fracture points. Humanity was learning, watching, preparing. On the colony world of New Geneva, Security Chief Maya Brooks ran her soldiers through combat drills. The base was officially listed as a training facility for colony defense. That was true, but it was only part of the truth. Maya's soldiers were learning techniques that no alien species had ever seen humans use. They trained in zero-gravity combat. They learned to fight in environments that would kill most species. They practiced with weapons that were disguised as civilian tools. They studied alien anatomy and psychology. They became experts in rapid deployment and surgical strikes. Maya herself was a veteran of Earth's last major conflict before humans reached the stars. She had seen combat in 3 different theaters. She knew what humans were capable of when pushed. She made sure her soldiers never forgot their training, even as they pretended to be simple colony guards. In a laboratory complex on Mars, Dr. Vincent Kane worked on projects that officially didn't exist. His specialty was adaptive technology. Every human ship, station, and colony had systems that could be rapidly converted for military use. Cargo holds that could deploy weapons, communication arrays that could jam enemy sensors, civilian shuttles with hidden armor plating and missile pods. Vincent had studied every major galactic conflict from the past 1,000 years. He understood how wars were fought in space. He knew the weaknesses of every major alien warship design. He made sure that when the time came, humanity would have surprises ready. But none of this was visible to the galaxy at large. To them, humans were the species that brought coffee and compromise to every meeting, the ones who apologized when others were rude, the ones who paid reparations even when they were the victims. The galaxy had grown comfortable with humanity. 3 generations passed. Human children grew up learning both sides of their species' nature. In school, they studied the importance of diplomacy, patience, and peaceful resolution. But they also learned their history. They learned about their ancestors who had survived ice ages and predators. They learned about the wars that shaped Earth. They learned that being kind was a choice, not a limitation. The galaxy continued to push. The Tal Shar hegemony became particularly aggressive. They seized 3 human mining operations in neutral space. They fired on civilian transports, claiming they were in restricted zones. They arrested human citizens on charges that everyone knew were invented. Each time, humanity responded with patience. They filed formal protests. They proposed arbitration. They offered compensation for misunderstandings. The Tal Shar High Commander, a being named Zekthar, became convinced that humans were constitutionally incapable of defending themselves. His species had evolved as ambush predators. They knew prey behavior when they saw it. Zekthar was wrong. He was catastrophically, fatally wrong, but he wouldn't realize his mistake until it was far too late. The smile on humanity's face wasn't fear. It was patience. The kind of patience that apex predators have when they're waiting for exactly the right moment to strike. Callisto Station orbited Jupiter's 4th moon like a small city suspended in space. The station was humanity's crown jewel of diplomacy. 3,000 permanent residents, representatives from 47 different species, conference halls, trade centers, restaurants serving food from across the galaxy. It was meant to be a symbol of peace. Ambassador Lauren Price arrived 3 days before the scheduled conference with the Tal Shar hegemony. She had been negotiating with them for 5 years now. Every meeting followed the same pattern. The Tal Shar would make demands. Lauren would propose compromises. Eventually, they would reach an agreement that the Tal Shar would violate within 6 months. This time felt different. Lauren could sense it in the messages she received. High Commander Zekthar himself was coming to Callisto. He had never attended a negotiation personally before. He always sent subordinates. His presence meant something had changed. Lauren spent those 3 days preparing. She reviewed every interaction Earth had ever had with the Tal Shar. She studied Zekthar's personal history. She analyzed the current political situation in the hegemony. She prepared counter-proposals for every demand she thought they might make. But she also sent a coded message back to Earth, just in case. Lieutenant Paul Graham was stationed outside the main conference hall. He was young, only 26, but he had earned his position through years of training. Paul looked like a simple security guard. His uniform was neat but non-threatening. His weapon was visible but small. He smiled at everyone who passed. Most aliens barely noticed him. That was intentional. Paul had spent 2 years training at the facility on New Geneva. He could disarm 3 opponents in under 5 seconds. He knew 17 ways to incapacitate a Talshar warrior without killing them. He had memorized every corridor and access point on Callisto Station. He was one of 200 humans on the station who had received similar training. The conference began on schedule. The main hall was impressive. High ceilings, windows showing the stars, a large circular table where 30 representatives sat. Observers from a dozen species watched from the gallery. Everything was being broadcast across the galaxy. High Commander Zekthar entered with his full entourage. 20 guards, 5 advisors, 3 servants carrying ceremonial items. The Talshar were reptilian, with dark green scales and yellow eyes. They moved with predatory grace. Their weapons were clearly visible and obviously lethal. Lauren stood to greet them. She bowed slightly, showing respect according to Talshar custom. Zekthar did not return the gesture. Instead, he walked past her and took his seat. His advisors smirked. His guards positioned themselves around the room. The message was clear. Humans were beneath them. The preliminary discussions went poorly. Zekthar interrupted Lauren constantly. He dismissed her proposals without consideration. He made jokes at humanity's expense that his entourage laughed at loudly. Other species in the room looked uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. This was between humans and the Talshar. Lauren remained calm. She kept her voice steady. She continued proposing solutions. This was her job. This was what humans did. They absorbed insults. They stayed patient. They found ways forward. Then Zekthar stood and made his announcement. The room went silent. What he said was not a negotiating position. It was a declaration. The Talshar hegemony was claiming the Kepler belt and all its resources. Humans would withdraw from 6 colony worlds immediately. Earth would begin paying annual tribute of materials and technology. These terms were not open to discussion. Lauren opened her mouth to respond, but Zekthar held up a hand. He wasn't finished. There was one more requirement. As a gesture of good faith and submission, Ambassador Price would personally execute 3 human criminals. On live broadcast, right here. Right now, the 3 humans were brought in. They were colony administrators who had been arrested months ago on fabricated charges. They looked tired and scared. Zekthar explained that these humans had insulted the hegemony. They deserved death. Lauren would prove humanity's loyalty by killing them herself. The galaxy held its breath. Every being in that room was watching. Billions more were watching the broadcast. Everyone expected the same thing. Lauren would negotiate. She would propose alternatives. She would try to find a compromise. She would bend as humans always bent. Instead, something changed in Lauren's face. The diplomatic smile faded. Her eyes went cold. When she spoke, her voice was different. It was quiet, but carried across the entire hall. There was no music in it now, no warmth. It was the voice of something very old and very dangerous. She said one word. Just one. It was not in any alien language. It was English, but every translator in the room caught the meaning. The word was no, not a diplomatic no, not a negotiating position. Just no, simple, final, absolute. Zekthar laughed. He thought she was bluffing. He gestured to his guards. They moved toward the 3 prisoners, weapons ready. If Lauren wouldn't do it, they would. They would kill the humans right there and prove that humanity had no power to stop them. Paul Graham was already moving before the guards took their second step. What happened next took less than 4 seconds but would be analyzed and replayed millions of times across the galaxy. Paul crossed 15 feet in what seemed like an instant. His hands moved in patterns too fast to follow. The first Talshar guard's weapon was out of his hands before he realized Paul had moved. The second guard tried to turn, but Paul had already swept his legs. The third guard actually managed to aim his weapon, but Paul's strike to the nerve cluster in his neck dropped him instantly. 3 guards down. No shots fired. No one killed. Just efficient surgical movements that spoke of years of training and absolute confidence. The other Talshar guards reached for their weapons. Before they could draw them, every other human in the room moved simultaneously. The servers who had been bringing drinks, the technicians who had been managing the broadcast equipment, the cleaning staff, all of them moved with the same trained precision as Paul. In 20 seconds, every Talshar weapon was on the ground. Every guard was restrained, not injured, not killed, just completely neutralized. The alien observers sat frozen in shock. They had never seen humans move like this. They had never imagined humans could move like this. Lauren stood and walked slowly toward Zekthar. He was still in his seat, trying to process what had just happened. His guards were supposed to be elite warriors. They had been taken down by humans, by ambassadors and janitors and waiters. She stopped in front of him. He looked up at her, and for the first time in his life, Zekthar felt something he had never associated with humans. He felt afraid. Lauren spoke again. Her voice was still quiet, still controlled, but now everyone in the room could hear the predator beneath the diplomat. She explained in simple terms that negotiations were over. The Talshar would release all human prisoners immediately. They would compensate the families of every human they had killed. They would withdraw from all disputed territories. They would do this within 24 hours. Zekthar tried to object. He tried to threaten. He tried to bluster. Lauren let him finish. Then she pulled up a holographic display. It showed every Talshar military position in space, every ship, every station, every colony. The display was updated in real time. It was intelligence that should have been impossible for humans to possess. She showed him one more thing. The display shifted to show human positions. Except the humans weren't where the Talshar thought they were. Those civilian freighters near Talshar space were actually military vessels. Those scientific stations were weapons platforms. Those colony ships were troop carriers. Humanity had been preparing for this moment for decades. Lauren gave Zekthar a choice. The Talshar could accept her terms and live, or they could reject them and find out what humans were really capable of when they stopped being polite. The decision was his. Around Callisto Station, human ships that had been quietly maintaining their positions suddenly went active. Their weapon systems came online. Their shields deployed. Every civilian vessel within 50 light-years of Talshar space did the same. The galaxy watched in real time as humanity's true military capability revealed itself. Zekthar looked at the data. He looked at the humans around him. He looked at Lauren's cold smile. And he realized the truth. Humans had never been weak. They had been patient. They had been gathering information, learning, preparing, waiting for exactly this moment. He accepted her terms. The footage from Callisto Station spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Every major news network played it on repeat. Every government analyzed it frame by frame. Every military commander watched in growing horror as they realized what they had missed. The recording showed everything. Lauren's transformation from diplomat to something else. Paul Graham's movements that seemed to defy physics. The way every human in the room moved with perfect coordination, the revelation of humanity's true military strength. It was a moment that would define galactic politics for generations. Security Chief Maya Brooks watched the broadcast from her office on New Geneva. She smiled grimly. The secret was out. Her teams had been training in the shadows for years, and now the galaxy knew. She immediately activated the next phase of humanity's response. Within hours, every human military installation went from covert to public. No more hiding, no more pretending. Commander Patricia Sanchez received her orders aboard the Earthguard 7. The ship had been registered as a civilian cargo hauler. Its manifest listed mining equipment and food supplies. In reality, it was a heavy cruiser with enough firepower to level a small moon. Patricia gave the command. The external hull panels slid back, revealing weapon ports. The cargo bay doors opened to show fighter craft. The sensor array that looked like a simple communications dish unfolded into a military-grade tactical system. Within minutes, the Earthguard 7 looked exactly like what it was, a warship. This scene repeated itself across human space. Hundreds of ships dropped their disguises. Thousands of satellites revealed their true purpose. Colony defense grids that aliens had thought were for protection against asteroids suddenly showed themselves as planetary. Defense networks capable of taking on fleets, Dr. Vincent. Kane was in his laboratory when the announcement came. He had spent 15 years developing dual-use technology. Every invention had a civilian purpose and a military application. The mining lasers that could cut through asteroids could also slice through starship hulls. The communication systems that linked colonies could jam enemy sensors. The medical facilities in every human settlement could be converted to military command centers in hours. Vincent activated his protocols. Across the galaxy, human technology shifted modes. It was seamless. It was fast. And it showed a level of preparation that made every alien observer realize how thoroughly they had been fooled. In the conference hall at Callisto, Lauren stood before the assembled representatives from 47 species. The Talshar delegation had been removed. Zekthar was in custody, facing charges from multiple governments. The 3 human prisoners had been freed and were receiving medical care. The other species looked at Lauren differently now. There was fear in their eyes, respect, caution. The friendly human ambassador they had known for years was gone. In her place stood something they were only beginning to understand. Lauren addressed them directly. She explained that humanity had never lied. They had simply chosen not to share everything. Humans had come to the galaxy hoping to find friends. They had genuinely wanted peace. But they had also learned, from their own history, that hoping for peace, while being unprepared for war, was suicide. She told them about Earth, about a world where humans had evolved, alongside creatures that could kill them in seconds, about how they had survived ice ages and natural disasters, about how they had fought wars that lasted generations and developed weapons that could destroy their entire planet, about how they had learned that the most dangerous predator wasn't the one with the biggest claws, but the one smart enough to make tools. The Crethean representative, Commander Vexiron, stood to speak. His voice shook slightly. He asked the question everyone was thinking. Had humans been planning this all along? Had every diplomatic gesture been a lie? Had humanity been preparing for conquest? Lauren's response was simple and honest. Humans had been preparing for survival. They had hoped they would never need their military strength. They had genuinely tried to build peaceful relationships. But they had also watched as species after species in the galaxy either conquered or were conquered. They saw how the strong dominated the weak. They learned quickly that in this galaxy, you needed strength to have peace. Director Nathan Cole arrived at Callisto Station the next day. He brought with him complete intelligence files on every major galactic power. He presented them openly to the assembly. There were no more secrets. The files showed everything humanity knew about alien military capabilities, political structures, economic weaknesses, and strategic resources. The species present were shocked by how much humans knew. They had assumed that Earth's intelligence services were basic. Instead, they found out that human agents had infiltrated dozens of governments, that human sensors had been mapping fleet movements for years, that human analysts had been studying alien psychology and warfare for decades. Nathan explained the human approach to intelligence. On Earth, there was an old saying, know your enemy. But humans preferred a different version, know everyone. Friends, enemies, and everyone in between. Information was survival. Understanding others was how you avoided conflict. And when conflict became unavoidable, understanding your opponent was how you won. The Valthene Chancellor, an elder named Vexiron, asked Nathan about the human concept of warfare. He had studied Earth's history since the Callisto incident. What he found terrified him. Humans had been fighting each other for thousands of years. They had developed strategies and tactics that no galactic power had ever considered. They understood logistics, psychology, propaganda, insurgency, and total war. Nathan confirmed this. He explained that every human child learned history. They learned about ancient battles and modern wars. They learned about great victories and terrible defeats. They learned what worked and what didn't. And they learned one critical lesson. War should always be the last option. But when it became necessary, you fought to win. Back on Earth, people watched the news coverage with mixed feelings. Some were proud that humanity had finally shown its strength. Others worried about what would come next. Children asked their parents if this meant war. Parents struggled to explain that sometimes showing you could fight was the best way to avoid fighting. Captain Kyle Morrison, who had made first contact years ago, gave an interview to a major news network. He talked about that first meeting with the Valthene, how nervous he had been, how carefully he had chosen every word, how much he had wanted humanity to make friends in the galaxy. Kyle explained that being polite wasn't weakness. Being diplomatic wasn't cowardice. Humans chose to be peaceful because they understood the cost of war. They had fought enough wars on Earth to know that even winners lost. Every conflict had casualties. Every battle left scars. The goal was always to avoid fighting if possible, but he also said something that resonated across the galaxy. He said that humanity's willingness to fight when necessary was what made their desire for peace meaningful. Anyone could claim to want peace. It took real strength to have the power to destroy and choose not to use it. Lieutenant Paul Graham became famous overnight. His movements in the conference hall had been analyzed by every military academy in known space. Combat instructors from a dozen species requested permission to study human fighting techniques. Paul gave several demonstrations, always emphasizing that the goal was to neutralize threats, not kill. The galaxy was learning that humans were experts at controlled violence. They could scale their response to any situation. They could be gentle or brutal as needed. They understood when to show mercy, and when mercy would be seen as weakness. This flexibility made them more dangerous than species who only knew how to respond with overwhelming force. In the days following Callisto, human diplomats received thousands of messages. Some species apologized for past insults. Others proposed new treaties with better terms. A few aggressive powers quietly pulled back from positions near human space. Everyone was recalculating their relationship with humanity. Lauren Price found herself at the center of this transformation. She answered countless questions. She gave dozens of interviews. She explained again and again that humans still wanted peace. They still valued cooperation. They still believed in diplomacy. Nothing about humanity's goals had changed. Only the understanding of what humans could do if pushed too far. The mask had come off. The galaxy had finally seen the apex predator beneath the smile. And they were learning to treat humanity with the respect that predators gave to other predators. Not fear, not submission. Just acknowledgement that some species were better left as friends than enemies. 3 months after the Callisto incident, the Galactic Assembly held an emergency summit. Every major species sent their highest representatives. The topic was simple and terrifying. What do we do about humanity? The assembly hall was packed. Species that had been enemies for centuries sat side by side, united by their shared concern about the humans. The Crethean Empire brought their entire war council. The Valthian Confederacy sent Chancellor Vexiron himself. Even the mysterious Zenkar Trade Guild, who rarely attended political meetings, sent observers. The first speaker was a Crethean general named Caxthar. He had spent the last 3 months studying human military history. What he found had given him nightmares. He stood before the assembly and presented his findings. Humans, he explained, had been fighting wars for over 5,000 years. Their planet had never been unified under a single government until recently. They had spent millennia fighting each other, and every war had taught them something new. They had developed strategies that the galaxy had never seen. Guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, totalvar, mutually assured destruction. The general showed records of human conflicts, wars that lasted for years, battles that involved millions of soldiers, weapons that could destroy entire cities. The assembly watched in horror as human history unfolded before them. These weren't the friendly diplomats they knew. These were survivors of a planet that had tried to kill itself repeatedly. But worse than the warfare was the human capacity for adaptation. General Caxthar showed how humans learned from every defeat, how they studied their enemies, how they developed new technologies and tactics faster than any species in galactic history. Humans didn't just fight, they evolved through conflict. The next speaker was Dr. Alan Foster, a human xenoanthropologist. He had been invited to explain his species to the assembly. His presentation was calm and factual, which somehow made it even more disturbing. Alan started with human biology. Humans evolved on a death world. Their planet had predators that could smell them from miles away. It had environmental extremes that killed thousands every year. It had diseases that wiped out entire populations. Yet humans survived. They survived by being smarter, more adaptable, and more stubborn than anything else on their world. He explained human endurance. Humans could run for days without stopping. They could survive injuries that would kill most species. They could function on minimal food and water. They could adapt to nearly any environment. This wasn't because they were specially built for it. It was because on Earth, anything that couldn't adapt died. Then Alan talked about human psychology. This was what truly frightened the assembly. Humans bonded with everything, They formed emotional connections with other species, with animals, with machines, even with ideas. Once something became part of their pack, humans would die to protect it. He showed examples. Human soldiers who threw themselves on explosives to save their comrades. Parents who fought off predators with their bare hands to protect their children. Civilians who organized resistance movements against overwhelming odds. Humans didn't know when to quit. They didn't have a surrender reflex like most species. They fought until they won or until they were dead. The assembly sat in stunned silence. They had welcomed humans into galactic society, thinking they were meeting a peaceful, cooperative species. Instead, they had invited apex predators who had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare. Captain Jennifer Walsh of the UESS Columbia gave the next presentation. She was a veteran officer who had served in human space forces for 20 years. She explained human military doctrine in simple terms. Humans preferred peace. That was true, but they prepared for war constantly. Every human colony had defense plans. Every civilian had basic survival training. Every ship had hidden military capabilities. This wasn't paranoia. It was survival strategy learned from a planet where the unprepared died. Jennifer explained that humans thought about warfare differently than other species. Most galactic powers fought to dominate. Humans fought to survive. This meant they didn't have rules about fair fighting. They would use any advantage, any tactic, any weapon, because to humans losing meant extinction. She also explained something that made the assembly very uncomfortable. Humans were good at making friends, but they were better at identifying and exploiting weaknesses. Every species they had met, they had studied. Every government they had mapped. Every military they had analyzed. Not because they planned to attack, but because knowledge was how humans survived. The Valthene Chancellor stood to speak. He was old, respected, and genuinely liked humanity, but even he had to admit that he had misunderstood them. He talked about his interactions with human diplomats over the years. How patient they had been, how reasonable, how willing to compromise. He said he had mistaken that patience for weakness. Many species had. They thought humans were prey pretending to be predators. They were wrong. Humans were predators pretending to be prey, and that made them infinitely more dangerous. The Chancellor proposed a new approach to human relations. Treat them as equals. Respect their boundaries. Honor agreements completely. Never test their patience. He pointed out that the Talshar hegemony no longer existed as a unified power. They had pushed humanity too far and paid the price. The fall of the Talshar had been swift and brutal. After Callisto, other species saw an opportunity. The Talshar had made enemies across the galaxy. With humanity openly opposing them, those enemies felt safe to act. Within months, the hegemony was torn apart, not by human weapons, but by human information and human encouragement to their enemies. The assembly debated for 3 days. Some species wanted to form an alliance against humanity. Others argued this would guarantee war. Some proposed economic sanctions. Others pointed out that human trade was now essential to the galactic economy. Every solution seemed to make things worse. Finally, a compromise emerged. The galaxy would accept humanity as they were. There would be no special restrictions, no military alliances against them, no economic warfare. Instead, the assembly would establish clear rules for everyone, boundaries that applied to all species equally, treaties that protected everyone fairly. It was the Crethean Empire that made the final observation. They had been warriors for thousands of years. They understood predator species. Their representative stood and explained something the others had missed. Humans weren't just dangerous because they could fight. They were dangerous because they could choose not to. A species that only knew violence was predictable. But humans could be diplomats or warriors. They could switch between roles seamlessly. You never knew which human you were dealing with until it was too late. The representative said that the Cretheans respected this. They had fought countless species over the millennia. Most were either strong or smart. Humans were both, and they had something else. They had patience. They played long games. They thought in terms of generations, not just battles. Back on Earth, people watched the assembly proceedings with interest. The government had decided to be transparent. All of humanity's diplomatic communications were made public. Citizens could see exactly what the galaxy thought of them. Some humans were proud. Others were worried. Teachers struggled to explain to children why the galaxy was afraid of them. Parents talked about the importance of being strong but fair. The message was consistent. Humanity had power, but power came with responsibility. The United Earth Council issued a statement. They acknowledged that humanity had prepared for conflict. They admitted to gathering intelligence and maintaining military capabilities, but they also reaffirmed their commitment to peace. The statement ended with a quote from Old Earth: "Speak softly and carry a big stick." The galaxy was learning about human history, human psychology, human capabilities, but most importantly, they were learning to read human signals. A human smile could mean friendship, but it could also mean warning. The key was learning which was which. Species that had been aggressive toward humanity began pulling back. Trade disputes were resolved quickly and fairly. Territorial disagreements went to arbitration instead of military posturing. Pirates who had targeted human ships found other prey. The message was clear. Humanity was still willing to be diplomatic, but they were no longer willing to be pushed around. The galaxy had finally learned the truth about humanity. They were apex predators who chose to be diplomats. They were warriors who preferred peace. They were the species that could destroy you but would rather share a meal. And that choice, that conscious decision to be kind despite having the power to be cruel, made them the most dangerous species the galaxy had ever met. Humanity's courteous mode hadn't failed. It had simply been adjusted. The smile was still there. But now everyone understood what it meant. It meant that humans chose kindness despite having the power to choose cruelty. It meant that humanity wanted friends, not subjects. It meant that peace was always preferred, but conflict was never feared. The galaxy had finally learned the truth about humanity. When a human smiled at you, it was a gift. A choice made by something strong enough to destroy but wise enough to build. The correct response was simple. Smile back. Be worthy of that courtesy. Treat them with respect. Because underneath every human smile was a truth that the galaxy would never forget. They were apex predators from a death world who had decided that being civilized was. 2 years after Callisto, the galaxy had settled into a new reality. Humanity remained active in galactic politics. They still sent diplomats to every major conference. They still negotiated trade agreements and territorial disputes. But now everyone understood the context. The humans sitting across the table weren't there because they had to be. They were there because they chose to be. Ambassador Lauren Price had been promoted. She was now Secretary General of Interspecies Relations, the highest diplomatic position in the United Earth government. She spent her days managing relationships with dozens of alien species. Each one now approached negotiations with a mixture of respect and caution. Lauren stood in the rebuilt Callisto station for a special ceremony. The station had been repaired and expanded. It now served as the permanent headquarters for the Galactic Diplomatic Corps. Representatives from every major species worked side by side. It was exactly what humanity had wanted from the beginning, a place where problems could be solved with words instead of weapons. The ceremony was simple. A memorial wall was being unveiled. It listed the names of everyone who had died in conflicts between species over the past century. Humans who had been killed before Callisto, Talshar who had died in their empire's collapse, victims from dozens of other conflicts. The wall was a reminder of the cost of misunderstanding. Lauren spoke to the assembled crowd. She talked about the past 2 years, about how relationships had changed, about how species that had been enemies were now partners, about how the galaxy was learning to resolve disputes peacefully because everyone understood the alternative. She answered the question that everyone still asked. Would humanity continue to be diplomatic? Her answer was yes, but with an explanation. Humanity chose diplomacy not because they were weak, but because they were strong. They had learned through bitter experience on Earth that the most powerful weapon wasn't the one that destroyed enemies. It was the one that turned enemies into friends. Director Nathan Cole had transformed the intelligence services. Instead of operating in secret, they now worked openly. Every major galactic power knew that humans were gathering information. But the humans shared that information. They published threat assessments. They warned species about dangers. They helped prevent conflicts before they started. Nathan explained the new policy in a public address. Transparency, he said, was the best deterrent. Let everyone know what humanity could do. Let them understand human capabilities. Let them see that humans had no hidden agendas. This openness built trust in a way that secrecy never could. The Office of Galactic Security now published annual reports. They detailed human military strength. They showed fleet positions. They listed technological capabilities. To other species, this seemed insane. Why would you tell potential enemies exactly what you had? The answer was simple. When everyone knew what you could do, they made better decisions. Species that might have tested human boundaries now understood the consequences. Governments that might have pushed for better terms now recognized that the deals they had were fair. Pirates who might have attacked human ships chose easier targets. Commander Lisa Chen ran the new Academy Exchange program. For the first time, non-humans could train alongside human military forces. The program was selective. Only species that humanity trusted were invited. But for those who were accepted, it was an education they would never forget. The exchange officers learned human combat techniques. They trained in human facilities. They studied human military history. But more importantly, they learned human philosophy. They learned why humans prepared for war while hoping for peace, why they valued every life but were willing to sacrifice for the greater good, why they could be gentle teachers one day and ruthless warriors the next. A Cretan officer named Kexavol completed the program and gave an interview about his experience. He said the most shocking thing wasn't human military capability. It was human restraint. He watched human soldiers train with weapons that could level cities. But they only used the minimum force necessary. They could destroy, but they chose not to. Kexavol said this changed how he understood power. The Crethians had always believed that showing maximum force proved strength. Humans showed that true strength was having overwhelming force and choosing not to use it. This restraint made humans more intimidating, not less. The galaxy was also learning to read human expressions better. They had always noticed human smiles. Now they learned there were different types. The warm smile of friendship. The polite smile of diplomacy. The cold smile of warning. And the predator's smile that meant negotiations were over. Training programs were developed to teach alien diplomats how to interpret human signals. They learned about human body language, tone of voice, word choice, cultural context. It became a required course for anyone who would interact with humans regularly. On Earth, society had adjusted to their new role in the galaxy. Children learned about their species' reputation alongside regular history. Schools taught both the importance of diplomacy and the necessity of strength. Parents talked to their children about responsibility and restraint. Human culture began to reflect this duality. Movies and books explored themes of power and restraint. Artists created works showing the balance between strength and kindness. Musicians wrote songs about being warriors who chose peace. The entire species was grappling with what it meant to be apex predators in a civilized galaxy. In Geneva, Lauren Price met with Chancellor Vex Iron at a small coffee shop. They had become genuine friends over the years. The old Valthene had a deep respect for humanity and a real affection for Lauren personally. They met regularly when he visited Earth. They sat outside watching people walk by. Humans and aliens mixed freely. Children played together. Vendors sold food from a dozen worlds. It was peaceful. Normal. Exactly what humanity had hoped to build. Vexiron asked Lauren the question that had been bothering him since Callisto. Had humanity always planned to reveal themselves this way? Had they been waiting for someone to push too far? Lauren sipped her coffee and considered her answer. She told him the truth. Humanity had hoped they would never need to show their teeth. They had genuinely wanted to build friendships based on mutual respect and cooperation. They had prepared for conflict not because they wanted it, but because their history taught them that being unprepared meant extinction. She explained that humans had studied every species they met, not to find ways to attack them, but to understand them. Understanding prevented conflict. Knowledge built bridges. Information saved lives. Every piece of intelligence gathered was meant to help humanity avoid wars, not start them. Vexiron understood. His species had a saying, know your prey. Humans had a different version, know everyone. And in knowing everyone, humans had found ways to be friends with species that would have been enemies. He asked one more question. What would have happened if the galaxy had never pushed? If the Talshar had never made their demands at Callisto? Lauren smiled. Her real smile. The warm one. She said that humanity would have continued being diplomats. They would have kept smiling and negotiating and building relationships. Eventually, the truth about human capabilities would have come out. but it would have been in a context of friendship rather than confrontation. She admitted that part of her wished it had happened that way. But another part recognized that sometimes you had to show strength to be taken seriously. The galaxy had seen humanity as weak because they acted peaceful. Now the galaxy knew that peace was a choice, not a limitation. Vex Iron raised his cup in a toast. To humans, he said, the species that climbed to the top of their world and decided that being kind was more important than being feared. Lauren clinked her cup against his. She added her own toast. To the galaxy, she said, for learning the difference between weakness and kindness, between fear and respect, between victims and predators who choose not to hunt. The sun set over Geneva. Across the galaxy, humans and aliens worked together. They traded goods and shared knowledge. They resolved disputes peacefully. They built something better than the cycle of conquest and submission that had defined galactic politics for millennia. The galaxy had learned its lesson. They had seen the apex predator beneath the smile. They had witnessed what humans could do when pushed too far. And in witnessing it, they had learned to respect humanity's choice to be peaceful. Because the most dangerous predators weren't the ones who hunted constantly. They were the ones who could hunt but chose not to. The ones who had claws but offered handshakes. The ones who could destroy you but would rather share coffee and conversation.